March wrap-up. I didn't go as ham in March as I did in February, and also I've decided that graphic novels are going to be done in separate wrap-ups, so that should help alleviate some of the strain of these ridiculously long videos. So hopefully we'll get through this pretty quickly. I think the format that I'm going to do is I'm going to share a few statistics as far as my reading goes, then I'll do the wrap-up, and then at the end I'm going to share a few statistics as far as my collection of books go. That will make a little bit more sense. But basically it's a wrap-up sandwiched in statistics. That's what I'm going for. So in March I read 13 books total. I read 3 middle grade, 4 young adult, and 6 adult. I think that adds up to 13. I haven't broken it out by genre yet, but I'm betting it's mostly fantasy. Yeah, 8 fantasy. So definitely the winner again this month. No big surprise there. I also read a couple of science fiction, a couple of nonfiction, and a contemporary. Now this entire month I felt like I've done a terrible job reading, and it turns out I kind of have as far as physically reading books. I only physically read 2 of these books. The rest were audiobooks, which is rough. Though, to be fair, I am currently in the middle of reading The Once and Future King by T.H. White and Lamort Arthur. I mean, those are 2 pretty beefy things to be reading simultaneously, so they're taking some time to get through. So I'm still, like, physically reading. I'm just not completing those physical reads. Okay, so I think I'm going to start with my nonfiction and then go into my classic, which I counted in my fantasy because it's a fantasy classic. But I'm going to start with my nonfiction. I try to read at least 1 nonfiction and 1 classic every month, so I'm going to start with those. The first nonfiction I'm going to talk about is Unfuquez Yourself. This is by Gary John Bishop, and it's a self-help book that I didn't really care much for. There wasn't anything like inherently wrong with it, but I felt like it had some conflicting messages. Part of me felt like it was trying to like convey that you should set realistic expectations for yourself and have better understanding of what makes you happy in life, but then part of it I also felt like was really trying to drive you to go and do and try to achieve as much as possible. And I guess those things aren't inherently contradictory, but the way they were presented in the book felt contradictory, especially because he was kind of critical about certain aspects of things that people do, such as, like, I remember watching Netflix was something that he harped on a lot. But, like, you're telling me to, like, do what makes me happy and what I consider to be my goal, and maybe my goal in life is to just sit around and watch Netflix. You don't know me. The other nonfiction I read is The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson, and I really, really enjoyed this one. True crime has been something that I've been wanting to get into for a while, and I know, like, there's a lot of really, like, not great true crime, like, not super readable true crime, but this one really gets praised for the fact that it's written in such a way that it very much reads like a novel, and I felt that. Like, it felt like reading a novel. There's a lot of personality in all of the characters, and there was growth, and, like, I feel like I understood these people quite a bit at the end of the book, and it made me kind of uncomfortable. But it is like there's a lot of details in each individual character that really helps develop them as a well-rounded 3-dimensional person instead of just like a list of statistics. And I really liked the fact that those details were explored. I also liked the way that it was presented kind of mundanely, like the stuff that Holmes did, the character Holmes did. I can't remember his full name or anything other than Holmes. But the things that he did, like, as gruesome and horrific as they were written in the book in a very, like, casual, like, this was just a normal Tuesday for him. And I think that that's really, like, reflective of that person's psychological well-being. And I just think that was done really well. So the classic I read this month was Dracula by Bram Stoker, and oh my gosh, why have I not read this book? This book pointed out 2 very specific things that I probably should have picked up on, but I hadn't realized up until this point, is that 1, I love books that are told in, like, dossiers. Like, I really enjoyed, like, the Illuminae files, and I'm anxious to get back into the Sleeping Giants trilogy, whatever that trilogy's called. And then when I picked up this one and started reading this, I was like so excited because I was just like, it's like diary entries and letters. I'm so jazzed. So that was a realization I had when reading this book. But the other realization, and this is the one that I really should have picked up on, but I freaking love Gothic literature. I adore Gothic literature, and I've actually like looked up a list on Goodreads that I think I'm going to try to like read as much of as possible. There's a lot. There's a lot on that list. I think there's maybe 600 titles on that list. I'm gonna link it in the information in case you want to like see the insanity that I'm going to try to accomplish with that list. But like the books that I immediately recognized on that list are some of my favorites. Like Jane Eyre, Frankenstein, Dracula, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Like those books I love so freaking much. And yeah, I mean, the fact that I hadn't fully realized that I was in love with Gothic literature is kind of ridiculous to me. Honestly, I don't know why it didn't happen until I read this one. But man, do I love me some Gothic literature. So Dracula is a different beast than what a lot of people think it is. The original text is very psychological. There's not a lot to do with actual, like, Dracula, and in fact, when I was reading it, it felt a lot more like a zombie story than anything, because it was so much about, like, the effects that Dracula had on the people around him, and not so much about, like, the monster itself. I really dug it. Like, I really enjoyed the exploration, and, man, are there just some Banff women in that book. Like, it does some really cool things with gender roles, especially when you think about the time that it came out. You look at the women and they're, like, getting stuff done. And then also you have a lot of men in it who are not afraid to, like, show emotion. Like, there's scenes where they're all just, like, sitting and, like, bawling. Like, they're just tears everywhere, and I like that. I like that it kind of broke those gender stereotypes in a lot of ways. Okay, I'll save the rest of the fantasy to the end, so let's go to let's do The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is so good. As much as it was hyped for me, and as much as I went into it anticipating that I was going to really love this book, I was so surprised by how much I loved this book. This is a brilliantly crafted book. It's completely written in verse. It's got that slam poetry punch, and it just benefits from that format so much. Like, so much about that format tells the story without having to do any extra legwork. And it's really incredible, the story that unfolds and how potent it is for how short and quick of a read it is. I listened to the audiobook. I would recommend doing that, even if you don't like audiobooks, because of the format, because of the slam poetry aspects. It really enhances the story. And it's short. Like, it's a short audiobook. It will not take you long to get through, and believe me, it's worth it. So this is a coming-of-age story that follows a Afro-Latina in Harlem, and she is just wrestling with a lot of things in her life, specifically her mother. Like, she has a bad relationship with her mother. She has a twin brother, and there's like some balancing there. She's trying to like build up courage to do like spoken word poetry, and it really hits like a lot of heavy themes, dealing with like spirituality and religion and sexuality and just like family relations. There's so much that's touched on it, and it's so amazing to me, like, how compact this book is and how much it has going on in it, and it's just gorgeous. God, this book's so good. So I read Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. This was actually like a carryover from February. I started in February, so it's not as fresh on my brain as the others, but holy crap, did I ever fall in love with this series. This is another series that, like, super hyped. Like, super hyped. It earned every bit of that hype in my eyes. Like, it's really well done. The fact that these books continue to surprise me, that is like the biggest thing that I appreciate about them. Like, I am so rarely somebody who gets thrown off by a plot twist. Either I've already called it, or it's something that I'm not even really caring about enough to have worried about trying to predict it, so it's just like, oh, okay, well, that's a thing now. But this series has really caught me off guard. At several different points in this story have I been like, whoa, wait, what? What's happening? And that's amazing to me. Like, I love the fact that these books can do that. It's probably one of the best paced reads that I've had in a long time, because it's so fast paced, like there's so much action and it's so high octane, yet it has these really like deep psychological themes that it peppers throughout, and it explores, and I never really feel like I'm being rushed through those moments, and I never really feel like they bog down the action. Like, it balances each other out in such a great way. And I think like the decision to have like kind of slower, more like introspective passages in between each chapter really lends itself to that kind of back and forth being like, oh, really cool action. Oh man, I never thought about it that way before. Oh, really cool action. Oh man, that's interesting. Like, that's the way the book's paced out, and it's brilliant. Have I just been gushing about this book and not really talking about what it is? Probably. So, Scythe, if you haven't heard of it before, is a utopian novel in which all like illness and death and all of that like nasty stuff is no longer an issue, because we have the Thunderhead, which is like this super AI computer that can just take care of all of that. However, overpopulation is still a concern because there are limited resources on the earth, and you can't feed everybody if like population just continues to grow unchecked. So there is a separate governing body called the Scythes that just are allowed to kill people, and so you're dealing with that kind of dynamic of these two governing bodies within this series, and like some very specific characters who are kind of like tied into all of this madness that's going on, and it's just great. Oh my god, I cannot wait for that third book. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This book I did not like. This book really frustrated me. This is a book that is set in a kind of apocalyptic setting where a vast majority of the population has been wiped out by a sudden flu, and yeah, like they're just dead, they're gone. But that's like it. Once that was done, then people just continue to exist. There's just a much smaller population of people. The thing that bothered me about this book, though, is I feel like we were following the dumbest of the survivors. Like, they couldn't figure out how to generate electricity. It had been like 20 years since the flu, and these people still hadn't figured out, like, how does electricity work? I wonder if there is like a book somewhere in one of these abandoned libraries that could possibly explain that. Like, there's just no common sense to any of it, and it was really frustrating. The entire story is told in like a non-linear way, so it's like before the flu following certain characters and after the flu following certain characters, and it was just kind of jarring going back and forth, and I felt myself not caring about any of the characters, so that was a bummer. And yeah, like it was just weird. It was like a zombie novel without the zombies, which it referenced itself, like that's a line from the book. Like, it's like, we're living in a zombie apocalypse, only there's no zombies. But it never really takes into account the fact that there is so much stuff in the world. Like, there is so much stuff that exists in this world that the fact that they're, like, struggling in any ways is dumb. Like, the percentage that has survived, and yet they talk about how everything's ransacked and there's, like, no stuff left around. I'm just like, there is so much stuff everywhere. Like, how did you run out of stuff that fast? I don't get it. Anyway, that book was dumb. I don't like it. A lot of people like it. I didn't like it. Alright, now we're into the fantasy. Let's do this. The Shadow Queen by C.J. Redwine. Got it right. First try. So this is a Snow White reimagining. And I was actually really surprised by this. It's a pretty high stakes novel, and there's a lot of aspects about it that I liked. I really liked the main character and how she wasn't like that weird reluctant heroine thing that seems to have been really popular for a while. Like, I kind of call it the reluctant revolutionary. Now, she was very much someone who wanted to fix things, and I liked the fact that she wanted to fix things. I appreciated that fact about her a lot. Like, that alone probably would have been enough to carry me through this book. But in addition to that, I think just in general, like, all of its characters were done really well, and like the pacing was good. Like, I was a very believable progression, and the story concluded in a very nice way, and I don't know, like, it was just a really fun, entertaining read, and when I go into a fairy tale retelling, that's what I expect, and this one totally delivered that. And it's not like super angsty or any of the tropes that I struggle with when I read YA. Like, it's just a well-crafted book. I was really pleased with this one, and it's part of a series. I don't think it's a series where you really have to like read them in a certain order. Like, I think each book follows a different fairy tale. And so, like, I'm interested to check out some of the other books. So I also read The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett, and I love Terry Pratchett so much. This is, like, the second book in the publication order, and already this early on, Discworld is, like, fully realized to me. Like, Discworld is, like, the progression from the first book and the kind of weird series of short stories and the convoluted mess that first book was. By the second book, it's just Discworld. Like, it's just like any other Discworld book, and it's so good. Also, can we talk about the bromance between Wincerin and Two Flower, because that's some serious stuff. Like, that's OTP levels right there. I don't really know of a way to, like, describe a Discworld novel other than it's absurd and you should go read it. So yeah, this is an absurd book. Go read it. I either read for the first time or reread Brian Jax's Redwall. I'm not entirely sure. So here's the thing. I was convinced that I had read it when I was younger, but when I was reading it, I didn't really remember a lot about it. But since having finished it just like within the last month, I don't really remember a lot about it. So I feel like there's some kind of weird amnesiatic cloud that happens with this series in particular, to where as soon as I'm done with it, I'm just like, I remember that being awesome, but I don't remember a lot of the details. The things that I do remember is, like, I really appreciate the way that it handles concepts of, like, war and sieges, and the fact that it's kind of drawn out and, like, it feels very realistic, but still in a way that, like, kids can approach and understand. And I really appreciate the fact that it doesn't underestimate any of its readers, including the very young readers. Like, it is a really well done book that, like, respects its audience and knows that it doesn't have to, like, dumb down its language in order to reach that audience, and I appreciate that so much. But yeah, I don't remember a lot of specifics. Like, none. Matthias is his name. There was a badger. She was cool. I liked the badger. There's a guy who, like a warrior that everybody looked up to. He's kind of a big deal. He has a name as well. Okay, so The Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan. I'm not going to take a huge amount of time on this. It is the 5th book in the Wheel of Time books. I am working my way through all of these. I should have them done by the end of the year. I'm really enjoying myself with them still. There's definitely times, especially at the beginning of this book, where it was slow. It did a whole lot of that rehashing all of the information that I already knew, which I know is something that you kind of have to do in a book series, but it's still frustrating when you're reading them all relatively close to each other and you're just like, I already know who this character is. You don't have to explain it to me every time, Robert. Just let me, what happens next in the story, Robert? But it did end on a really high note, and I'm super jazzed going forward, even though I know that I'm going into some of the slower paced, like really kind of slog-worthy books. I still am super jazzed after that conclusion to see what happens next. And that's all I can ask for at this point. If I can get to the end of the book and be like, but what happens next? Then I'm not going to have any problems finishing this series by the end of the year. Okay, Gregor and the Prophecy of Bane, which is the second in the Underland Chronicles. I'm eventually going to learn the name of this series, and it's going to be a glorious day. But this is pre-Hunger Games Suzanne Collins, and I really like these books. Like, Hunger Games is a book series that I'm kind of lukewarm about. Like, I really enjoyed them when I was reading, but upon reflection over the years, not liking those books as much. But these, they're just really fun. So this follows Gregor and his little sister Boots and their adventures in the, like, I think it's just called the Underlands, where there's, like, giant bats and rats and bears, oh my. There's not actually bears, but there's roaches, so roaches, oh my. And it's actually pretty kind of, like, dark and gritty for a middle grade book series, which I appreciate. I really like the dark grittiness of it. And there's been a whole lot of having to live with the consequences of your actions. That's been reflected, like that's been an ongoing theme throughout this series, and like things like have weight and people don't just like magically get over stuff. There was a little bit of that at the end of the second book, which I wasn't crazy about. There was a little bit of that, like just slap a band-aid on it. But for the most part, it's really been more like healing takes time, and you can't just, like, overcome any obstacle without, you know, putting any effort into it. And yeah, I like the weight of that. I like the weight of these books. They feel like a really good balance between, like, wacky, middle grade comedy fun and, like, hard topics, like dark things that you have to face and deal with. Speaking of wacky, middle grade fun, Twice Magic by Cressida Cal. Cressida Cal is just a master at middle grade. She does awesome stuff. And I could sit here and just gush about How to Train Your Dragon and just have that be the rest of this video. I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to talk about the Wizards of Once series. The Wizards of Once, automatically more serialized. Like, the How to Train Your Dragon books were really, until like the very end, you could read them in any order and you'd be fine. These, I feel like, are already way more serialized. I would read these in order. Like, the ending of the second book definitely ended on a cliffhanger that set up stuff to happen in the third book. So already I'm, like, heavily into the fact that this is a more serialized book series, and I'm excited for the future. It's not to the How to Train Your Dragon levels yet, but I am anticipating that happening with my creepy plotty fingers. The Wizards of Once books follow a group of wizards and a group of wizards that exist in this magical forest, and they're warring against each other, and then you have a wizard boy and a warrior girl become friends, and then they like go off on adventures together. Also, side note, like the weird little gimmick that it plays around with, like who's the narrator, because it's talking about like the narrator, somebody who's there throughout the story, but you don't really know which person is the narrator of the books. Totally calling it right now. I think it's the forest. I think the forest is the narrator. Totally going with Sentient Forest, and I'm ready for that. Okay, so the last book is Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. This was a book that I accidentally read. I apparently put it on hold and didn't realize that I put it on hold, and then I got an email from Libby, and it was just like, hey, here's your audiobook, and I was like, cool! What is this? So Once and Future is a young adult Arthurian legend book, and it is set in the future, and you have a reincarnated Arthur inside of a female, and Merlin has aged backwards, and now he's a teenager. So my main concern when I heard that plot summary was that, is this an Arthur Merlin romance? It's not. And it actually is like a really enjoyable book in a lot of ways. The reincarnation aspects worked really well. Merlin, I didn't felt super Merlin-esque, and they kind of just like brushed that under the rug by explaining that he was a teenager, so he was dealing with like teenage hormones, so he couldn't be like my depiction of Merlin. And also like Ari, she's a fine character, I like her, but she's no Arthur. And that was very apparent throughout all of that. But if you kind of just accept the book for what it is and just enjoy the ride, it's really a lot of fun. It reminds me a lot of the Lunar Chronicles books, which are the books that kind of sparked my interest in reading again just because I found them so like fun and entertaining. Right now I'm just kind of like meh about a lot of the characters, but it's still like a fun reimagining of the Arthurian story, and it gets that into the hands of younger readers, people who may not have experienced the Arthurian legend much yet. And if that inspires them to read more on Arthurian legend, I say that's a win, because apparently I am super into Arthurian legend all of a sudden. So we're done with the wrap up portion of this video, and now I'm going to go into a collection update. This isn't a fully realized segment yet, but it is something that I want to explore a little bit just because I think it would be fun. But a big goal that I have this year is to kind of pare down my collection, and I'm trying to be pretty ruthless when it comes to books that I read, and if they're actually books that I want to continue to take up space in my house. And I also like really want to focus in on reading my own books. But there's a lot of books from the library that I get as well, and I want to support the library. So it's a balancing act. It's not perfect. So of the 13 books that I read in March, 7 of them I own physical copies of, and 6 of them were exclusively from the library. Of the 7 books that I already own, I'm going to get rid of 3 of them. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of Station 11. That one was obvious. I didn't enjoy it, so that's already on the pile. But upon some further reflection, I think I'm also going to go ahead and get rid of The Shadow Queen and The Devil in the White City. I just don't see myself really revisiting those books, and I don't need to have them in my permanent collection. So those 3 books I'm going to let go of. The books that I own that I definitely think I'm going to keep are The Light Fantastic, Redwall, Dracula, and The Shadow Rising. No. The Fires of Heaven, The Shadow Rising is the 4th book. And then I also wanted to look at like the books that I got exclusively from the library and see if any of those I liked enough that I would want to own in my permanent collection. And I think of those, The Poet X is a pretty obvious one. Thunderhead is a pretty obvious one. And then I'm kind of lukewarm about Twice Magic right now. I could see myself as I get further along in the series, if I really like fall in love the way I did with the How to Train Your Dragon books, that I am eventually going to want to own that whole series. I'm not really feeling it enough to say that I would want to add that to my collection. But Thunderhead and The Poet X are obvious. Like, those are books that I want to own copies of. So basically what I'm saying is, I'm willing to let go of 3 books, but I want to exchange them for 2, possibly 3 books. So I'm not doing a whole lot to like downsize my collection this month, but at least it's not growing. And as you may or may not know, I'm not buying any books this year, so those are just going to go on like a wish list. And then at the end of the year, I'll be able to reflect on them more. And that's why they're like, I may buy them. Because at the end of the year, I might have different opinions on those books and not really feel the need to own them. But right now, like, if I just had unlimited money, yeah, I'd buy those books. So that's the end of my wrap-up / collection update weird conglomerate video thing I'm doing. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you've been reading down in the comments, and you'll see me in the next video.